pot sits on the stove, barely warm. Fuel is being saved. The room smells faintly of boiled grain and damp wood. Outside, winter presses against the walls, and the streets are quieter than they were before the war. Inside this kitchen, survival is measured not in days, but in meals, not in abundance, but in restraint. The recipe being prepared tonight is not written in any book. It is remembered. It has been cooked before, during shortages, during winters when supply trains did not arrive, and when ration cards no longer promised anything certain. During the Second World War, civilian families across Europe and beyond relied on food not as comfort but as strategy. Recipes were chosen because they worked under pressure. They required few ingredients, tolerated substitutions, and could be cooked slowly or reheated endlessly. Many of these meals disappeared after the war, replaced by abundance and convenience, but during the conflict, they kept households alive. One such recipe was thickened grain soup, sometimes called hunger soup, though families avoided naming it that way. It began with water, a small amount of grain such as barley or oats, and whatever vegetable scraps were available. Potato peels, wilted cabbage leaves, or a single onion could be enough. The key was time. The soup simmered slowly, allowing starches to thicken the liquid into something filling. It could be reheated for days, each time growing denser. This soup was never meant to be finished quickly. It was meant to endure. Another forgotten recipe relied on dried bread rather than flour. Bread was sliced thin and left to harden completely. When needed, it was soaked in water or broth, then mashed and cooked again into a thick porridge-like meal. Sometimes a spoon of fat was added, sometimes not. This dish allowed families to reclaim food that would otherwise be inedible. It transformed waste into sustenance and required almost no fresh ingredients. Potato-based flat cakes were another wartime staple. Potatoes were boiled, mashed, and mixed, with a small amount of flour or even ground dried bread. The mixture was shaped into thin cakes and cooked on a pan using minimal fat. These cakes could be eaten alone or dipped into soups. They required little fuel, stretched limited flour, and could be prepared even when ovens were unusable. In regions where cabbage was plentiful, fermented cabbage stew became a long-term survival recipe. Sauerkraut was boiled slowly with water and occasionally thickened with grain. The fermentation preserved nutrients that prevented illness during long winters. The stew was sour, sharp, and repetitive, but it endured. Families learned that eating the same meal day after day was preferable to eating nothing at all. Another lost recipe relied on rendered fat and grain. Small amounts of fat were heated and mixed with coarse flour or cracked grain, then pressed into dense cakes. These were not baked for pleasure but for storage. Once cooled, they could last weeks or longer. A small portion provided energy during labor or cold weather. These cakes were often hidden away, reserved for the most difficult days. Milk-based soups also played a role when powdered or diluted milk was available. Milk was thinned with water and thickened with grain or bread. This created a mild, filling meal suitable for children or the ill. Even when milk supplies were inconsistent, families saved what they could for these recipes, understanding their value beyond taste. Vegetable mash was another adaptable recipe. Root vegetables were boiled together, mashed into a single mass, and seasoned only if possible. This allowed families to use vegetables that were bruised or partially spoiled, salvaging what could still nourish. The mash could be reheated repeatedly and eaten in small portions over several days. Finally, seed-based porridges appeared in the worst conditions. When grain was scarce, families turned to seeds meant for planting, grinding them into rough meal. This was a last resort, but it worked. The porridge was bitter and coarse, but it provided calories and kept people alive long enough to reach the next season. These recipes were not celebrated. They were not written down proudly. They were tools shaped by necessity and refined through repetition. Each one reflected a deep understanding of scarcity, fuel conservation, and the human body's need for steady nourishment rather than excess. As the war dragged on, families adjusted these meals constantly. Ingredients changed, portions shrank, but the structure remained. These recipes were systems, not dishes. They were designed to adapt. When the war ended, many of these meals vanished from memory. People wanted to forget hunger. They replaced survival food with celebration food. But the knowledge did not disappear entirely. It waited quietly, in memory and tradition. Today, these recipes remind us that survival is rarely about innovation. It is about remembering what works. In times of crisis, the past offers lessons written not in books but in empty bowls and enduring lives.